Hello, members of the 3F network. It's funny when you do the kind of work that I do. You know, you spend a lot of time dealing with and talking with and helping so many different kinds of businesses, and it's really surprising being on this side of the desk, if you like, how often common themes seem to happen. And they show up not just in one business, but in many businesses at the same time. And then it moves to another kind of theme. It's really curious. And at the moment, in so many of the businesses that I'm working with, a common theme that's coming up at the moment is the sense of being overwhelmed with too much to do. Now, as you'll appreciate with being here in the 3Fs network and this Facebook group, it's I find the whole concept of busyness a really, really important one to nail, because you'll have heard the story that people think of when people find out you're running your own business and they ask you, "Oh, how's it going? Are you busy?" How many people will say, "Yes, great, I'm really busy," when we know that being busy is not the purpose of having a business. Well, that's fine. People can understand that. But what's the answer? How do you become more productive? How do you become less busy and yet get more done? And the answer is what I'd like to share with you here, some ideas that I hope you'll find really helpful. And at the headline level is it sounds so obvious, it can't really be true, but it is. And the secret to getting more done and being less overwhelmed is actually to do less. Stop trying to do everything, do less. Now, I know that the normal reaction at this point for many people is, well, I've got too much to do, I can't possibly do less. And this is where a couple of other really important ideas come in, which are about, you may have heard the idea of the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the benefit that you get from something is from only 20% of the activities, or 80% of the profit that you get in your business is a result of only 20% of the customers, and so on. Now, as you probably will know, there's nothing special about the numbers 80 and 20. It doesn't have to add up to 100. It could be 65. But the point is, there's a small proportion of activity that creates the biggest proportion of gain or benefit. And the flip is also true, that there's a very big amount of energy, effort, activity, customers, and so on that produce the smallest amount. So when we're trying to do everything, we're trying to do the 100, if you like, to get 100. And you don't need to do that. We need to focus on the 20%, or the smaller proportion. So that then is just a question of prioritizing. How do you prioritize? Well, there's many different ways. I'm not going to go into that in this video now. If you have ideas on it, please share, or if you've got any questions on it, please post any questions into this video. But what I found is a really great book, which many will know that I've recommended to many people, that takes that 80-20 to the extreme. And it says, actually, let's not just focus on the few things that matter, but actually let's go all the way down and drill down and down and down until you can find the one thing that really matters. And that idea comes from a book called The One Thing. And in that book, in essence, it's a great book and I do recommend it, but in essence, you don't need to read the whole thing. What there is a question in there. I think they call it they call it the golden question, but a very specific question, and it's brilliantly worded. But the idea is just to get one thing and make that your priority. And the question to help identify that is, what is the one thing that I could do in relation to whatever the subject is? So what is the one thing that I could do to increase sales? What is the one thing I could do to have a happier relationship at home, whatever the context is? But what is the one thing that I could do such that if I did it, everything else would become either easier or unnecessary? And if you think about the ending there, that's really, really leverageable. It's very impactful, right? Such that if I did that one thing, everything else would be either easier, well, isn't that worth doing? Or even unnecessary. Now that's the power of the one thing. And you can find your priority thing, your one thing, by better thinking, asking yourself a better question. And that's a great question to ask. What is the one thing that you could do such that if you did it, everything else becomes either easier or unnecessary? And when you ask yourself that question, if you can get into the habit of doing that and get into the discipline and the belief that it's better to focus on a few things, the sense of overwhelm disappears. What prompted me to talk about this today was I've literally just got off a call with a client who is facing this overwhelm. Now, they're early in their business journey. So they've developed a solution that, of course, they're very excited by. It's probably very clever. But right now, they're finding it very difficult to attract enough people to it to get enough clients. And so they're not earning anything like enough income from it yet. It's a classic story. And so what are they thinking is the problem? Well, it might be the way that they're marketing. And what's the right wording? What's the copywriting? How many emails should we send? What should the subject line say? What should the call to action be? What should we have on our website? Should we have a button? Should we have a logo? Should we have a landing page? Should we have a sequence of follow-ups? Should I send one email or should I send 10 emails? You can imagine the conversation was suddenly expansive and explosive. So that's the initial problem. Or is the problem that the product isn't actually any good? In which case, do I need to develop it, put more coding into it, put more data into it, and that one exploded? Or do I actually not understand the market well enough yet? And we've got not enough, the messages that we're putting out isn't clearly solving the problem that our prospective customers and clients have. Are we actually addressing the wrong market? Is there a big enough market for this product? So they were all over the place, hugely stressed and overwhelmed, completely normal, completely predictable, and far from alone, right? And then if you can say, well, actually, what is the one thing? It forces that question, it forces that to reach a decision that says, okay, this is where I need to be, this is where I need to focus. They had far too many areas, never mind all the details, to be focusing on. So then one thing for them was actually to understand the market better. If they can identify for them the particular problem that their market and their audience is experiencing, and they can find the words around that their audience uses, now they've got the story that they can sell on the back of. Now they've got the reason why someone would be interested in the product that they have to offer. So their one thing, no, it's too early for marketing in the big sense for them. They need to get a much clearer picture on what the problem is that their audience is experiencing, and that's the one thing. So what's the one thing that they could do to find out the problem, such that if they did that, everything else would be either easier or unnecessary? For them, it was they're going to do this, is to reach out to people on LinkedIn, their potential market, their potential audience, and ask for essentially a research conversation, absolutely not a selling conversation, genuinely research to understand what is the problem that you're experiencing. Tell me about what's going on in your world. And if they hear the answers or questions about that's not thank you, Dax. If they're experiencing problems that are nothing to do with the solution, well, they know they've got a bigger bridge to cross, a bigger gap to fill. So that's going to be really, really important to them. So that's the one thing, and suddenly all of that overwhelm, all of that busyness that they would never have got through can be lasered down and just do one thing. For them, it will, if they do the research well, it certainly can, and it usually does, utterly transform their business. So that's what will be happening for them. And for you, if that's of interest, or not interest for you, but if that's an idea that inspires you, I'd encourage you to think about the 80-20 rule. What are the few things that really make a difference? Don't do everything. Stop being overwhelmed. Stop it. What are the few things that matter? And then home it down into one thing, such that if you did that, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary. It's a big price to have. I hope that's helpful. See you again sometime. Cheers for now.